This happened about a week ago. I'm 32 now, and I went back to my old Appalachian hometown for Thanksgiving. I wanted to finish my thesis on local folklore. It felt normal at first. I arrived early and stepped into my childhood home. The smell of turkey filled the air. My grandmother was in the kitchen humming a tune. I felt that familiar warmth. On my first night, I heard her mumbling. It didn't make sense. The words sounded strange, almost like a chant. I thought maybe she was just reminiscing about old stories. I brushed it off, but that night I couldn't sleep. I heard creaking sounds, either the house settling or something else. Over the next few days, I tried focusing on my research. Every conversation with neighbors turned into questions about my family. They smiled, but their eyes lingered too long. My grandmother felt distant too. I could feel something was off between her and the neighbors. I thought they just had a lot of history, but it seemed heavier. One evening, after dinner, I stepped outside for some fresh air. The autumn leaves crunched under my feet. Chill crept in. I couldn't shake the feeling someone was watching me from the shadows. I heard faint wailing or whispering, but turned to find nothing. Days blurred into each other. I kept hearing those sounds, soft cries echoing in the night, almost like someone was calling for help. I didn't want to care, but curiosity got the better of me. My grandmother mentioned a disappearance during Thanksgiving years ago. I asked about it, but she changed the subject quickly. I thought maybe I should dig deeper. Late one night, I grabbed the old family album. It was dusty and forgotten in a corner. Flipping through pages, I saw a picture of my great-grandfather. His eyes looked familiar, but in an unsettling way. A shiver ran down my spine. Did I inherit his looks or something worse? That night, I dreamed horrifically. I woke with my heart racing, thinking I heard murmurs again. This time, they felt closer, more urgent. I was scared but curious. I had to find out what was hidden in our family's past. Then there was a knock on the door, soft and hesitant. I got up, feeling the weight of the air pressing in on me. I opened it a crack and my grandmother stood there. Her eyes were wide and she whispered, "It's not safe to be out here alone." The air felt colder. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. Before she could reply, I heard that voice again, calling from the darkness, soft yet familiar. It felt wrong. Why was I standing there? I turned to look, but nobody was there. Then I felt it, a sudden coldness enveloping me. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come out. I turned to my grandmother, but she was gone. The shadows wrapped around me tighter. What lay behind our family's history? I was in too deep to turn back now. I stumbled back inside, the door slamming shut behind me as if it had a will of its own. My heart raced as I locked it, my fingers trembling. The familiar warmth of home felt distant now, replaced by freezing dread. I scanned the room, but it felt empty, void of comfort. The weight of my grandmother's warning hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I needed answers. The wailing had grown louder since I arrived, and I could no longer ignore it. I decided to confront the neighbors. They knew something, I was sure of it. I pulled on my jacket and ventured out, ignoring the chill that seeped into my bones. Walking down the gravel path, the faint light of porch lamps flickered like restless spirits. The first house I approached belonged to Mrs. Langley, an elderly woman with a reputation for gossip. When she opened the door, her eyes widened but quickly shifted to worry. "Perhaps you ought to stay indoors tonight," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Things aren't what they seem, dear." "Things like what?" I pressed, the urgency in my voice rising. "I need to know about the disappearances." Her face drained of color. "They're best left buried. Some stories aren't meant to be told." Before I could react, she shut the door, leaving me bewildered on her porch. I turned and hurried to the next house. Mr. Jenkins lived there. He'd been around forever and had an ear for the townsfolk's tales. I knocked with force, desperation gnawing at my insides. When he answered, he too looked startled. "What do you want?" he asked, but there was a quiver in his voice. "I need to know about the disappearances," I urged. "Please." He hesitated, then glanced back into his house. "Not here. Come into the barn. It's safer." The barn smelled of hay and old wood. filled with shadows. He gestured for me to sit on a stack of bales. It's dangerous to talk, but I'll tell you what I know. I perched on the edge, leaning in. What's happening here? He looked around anxiously, lowering his voice. This place is cursed. Everyone's kept quiet since old man Buchanan vanished decades ago. Something took him during Thanksgiving, and they say his spirit still wanders, seeking revenge. Revenge for what? I asked, chills racing down my spine. Family secrets, he muttered. They go back generations. Your people have been involved. My mind raced. My grandmother had mentioned Buchanan's name. I had to tell her what I learned, but as I turned to leave, a sudden wind rattled the barn doors, and I froze. A dark shape flickered at the edge of my vision. I didn't want to look, but I did. That's when I saw it, a figure cloaked in shadows staring directly at me. My breath hitched. What did I just uncover? The stories were alive and they were hungry. I blinked, and the figure was gone. My heart pounded in my chest and I scrambled off the hay bales. Mr. Jenkins, I called, my voice shaky. Did you see that? He stood frozen, staring into the dark corners of the barn, his expression pure terror. It's never just a figment, he whispered. You need to leave, now. I didn't need to be told twice. My instincts kicked in, and I darted toward the barn doors. The night air hit me like a slap as I burst outside, running down the gravel path. But the chill of the darkness still lingered in my bones, a creeping sense of dread following closely behind. I barely noticed where I was going until I reached the old Buchanan house. Its silhouette loomed against the starless sky, dark and forbidding. Memories of my grandmother's stories flooded my mind, warnings about the shadows, the stories left untold. My feet halted before the gate. I felt a pull, a gnawing urge to uncover what lay buried there. With a deep breath, I stepped forward, pushing the creaking gate open. The wood protested like a living thing, and I shivered. The garden, long overgrown, was almost unrecognizable, with wild vines weaving through the skeletal remains of what once was a home. As I moved closer to the house, the wailing intensified. A haunting melody threaded through the wind. It seeped into my bones, deepening my fear. Driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation, I approached the front door. My hand hesitated over the doorknob, the weight of it heavy with history. Then I remembered what Mr. Jenkins said about family secrets. With a resolute grip, I turned the knob and pushed the door in. It swung open with a groan, the darkness spilling out like ink. I fumbled for a light switch, but nothing happened. The whispers from the walls seemed to envelop me, and I felt an undeniable presence, as though I was being watched. A faint glow filtered through a window at the far end of the room. I walked toward it, my breath lining my throat. When I reached the window, I could see something shifting outside. A figure. The shape moved slowly, but it was unmistakably humanoid. My heart raced as I pressed myself against the wall for cover. Suddenly, the light flickered. Shadows danced across the room, and I strained my ears to catch fragments of the wailing. It was almost pleading. That's when I saw it. A book laying on the dusty table opened to a page marked with a black ribbon. Instinctively, I stepped closer, needing to know what it contained. But a sudden cold draft swept through the room, and the door slammed shut behind me with an ominous bang. Trapped. I felt my pulse thunder in my ears. I had to find out who or what was in that garden, who it belonged to. This wasn't just about the Buchanans anymore, but about me. I wasn't going to back down. I reached for the book, but just as my fingers brushed its pages, the wailing escalated into screams. Instantly, the shadow outside shifted, darting toward the window, and I froze. What was waiting for me on the other side? The air thickened around me as I stood there, half-crouched, my heart racing. The screams seemed to vibrate through the old wood of the house, crawling under my skin. I gripped the edge of the table, cold and unwelcome. I couldn't stay here much longer. It felt like the walls were leaning in, watching me with quiet anticipation. I turned to the book. The dim light flickered, giving me just enough illumination to make out the words on the yellowed pages. My pulse quickened again as I read the title, The Lost Souls of Buchanan. What was it about? I desperately needed to know, but as I flipped the pages, they were filled with strange symbols and sketches. I couldn't understand them. Panic bubbled up in my throat. The shadow moved again outside, and I felt a new sense of urgency. Whatever it was creeping in the garden wouldn't wait. I scanned the room for another way out. The only other exit I could see was a small window above the sink. It was probably too high for me to reach, but I was running out of options and time. Just then, the book started to vibrate. The thrum passed through my fingertips, a deep resonance that echoed with the wailing. I jerked my hand back, startled. The noise intensified, swirling around me like a storm. I couldn't tell if it was the book or something else, but I knew I had to act fast. I darted toward the window, only to be halted by a loud crash outside. I swiveled around to see the figure, now clearer against the darkness. It was a woman, her face pale, hair wild, and eyes wide with a mix of fear and anger. She pointed at me, her mouth moving, but I couldn't hear her words over the cacophony. I stumbled back, heart racing. "What do you want?" My voice came out more like a whisper. In response, the wailing crescendoed, turning into a chilling chorus of screams that echoed off the walls. I turned to the door I'd come through, willing it to open, but it remained firm and shut, like a giant stone. Then I noticed something within the shadows behind her. Other figures emerged, faces twisted in silent pleas. They were trapped, just like I was. Panic welled up inside me. I didn't belong here. I needed to find a way to escape. But I couldn't turn away. I was drawn to them. That's when I heard it. The book called to me again, vibrating with an odd energy. My fingers brushed it once more, and suddenly the chaos froze. Silence enveloped the room. A thick blanket that stifled the screams, leaving only the soft thump of my heartbeat. "What have you done?" I whispered to the book, feeling an eerie connection spark between us, as if it held the answers I was searching for. Before I could pull away, the glow from the book intensified. A surge of light burst forth, illuminating the faces around me. They weren't just shadows anymore. They were memories, fragments of what once had been, stories left untold. Then the door creaked open behind me, revealing the night outside. Just as I took a step toward freedom, I glanced back at the figures, the lost souls. I knew they were waiting for me to decide. Did I escape, or did I uncover what they wanted to tell me? Caught between two worlds, I hesitated, and that's when the woman lunged forward, reaching for me. My instincts kicked in. I ducked to the side as her hand shot out, barely missing my shoulder. I could feel her presence, a heaviness that made the air around us shift. I didn't know if she wanted to help or harm me, but the fear coiled tight within my chest. "Who are you?" I managed to say, my voice trembling. "What do you want with me?" Her gaze was intense, her mouth moving in desperate urgency, but the words still didn't reach me. The air was electric, crackling with an unspoken connection. I could feel her pain, the weight of her sorrow, mingling with mine. I glanced back at the door. The outside world beckoned, but the pull of the book and the figures behind her was stronger. I was torn. If I fled, would I leave them behind forever? Or would I let their stories and the answers within the book determine my fate? The noise began again, a low hum rising from the pages of The Lost Souls of Buchanan. I could feel its vibration in the pit of my stomach. It was urging me to make a choice. Before I fully realized what I was doing, I moved closer to the specter of the woman. Her expression softened, though it was still laced with desperation. Slowly, she pointed toward the book. I followed her gaze and saw it glowing, illuminating the room with a flickering light. The symbols on the pages shifted, rearranging themselves, and for a brief moment, I could comprehend their meaning. They spoke of lost voices, of history trapped within this house. "Please," I whispered, now fully aware of the weight of my decision. "I need to know." The woman nodded slowly, her eyes pleading for me to understand. Just as I reached for the book, everything shifted. The room lurched, and the screams flared into a new echo, a chorus of warning. I felt a pull at my core as if reality had warped around me. "Wait," I shouted, but it was too late. The floor felt like it dropped beneath my feet, and I was yanked forward into the light pulsing from the book. In that moment I was engulfed by a rush of memories that weren't mine. Faces, places, fleeting moments washed over me like waves. Sweet laughter, desperate cries for help, all woven into the tapestry of the lost souls of Buchanan. As the onslaught of images faded, I found myself in a different room, still inside the house but transformed. The woman was with me, her figure clearer and more defined. The other spirits loomed close, their faces now expressive, forming an audience around us. I blinked, realizing I was no longer just an observer. I was part of their tale. I took a deep breath. "What have you brought me into?" One of the figures stepped forward, a man who looked familiar from the memories I had experienced. "You were chosen, a bridge between our worlds. But the danger isn't over." "What danger?" I asked, feeling the weight of eyes upon me, both terrified and curious. Before he could answer, the walls around us began to tremble. Shadows flickered like flames and a low growl filled the air, echoing through the space. I could feel my heart racing as a new terror swept through the room. Whatever I had awakened was far worse than I had imagined. "Run!" the woman cried out, her voice sharp against the encroaching dark. It was no longer about choices or stories. It was about survival. And that's when I realized there was no escaping now. I felt the weight of urgency wrap around me like a vice. The spirits surged around us, their expressions morphing into fear, an emotion I now shared. I had crossed a line, and whatever was lurking in the shadows was hungry for more than our attention. "Where do we go?" I shouted, glancing wildly around the unfamiliar room, desperate for an exit. The walls, once sturdy and sheltering, were now alive with movement, pulsating as if breathing. A deep rumble echoed from the floor, reverberating in my bones. "Follow us!" The man who spoke before gestured toward a corridor that seemed to shimmer and fade. It led deeper into the house, away from the chaos. I hesitated, fear rooting me momentarily in place. What if I chose wrong again? The woman grabbed my arm, her grip cool yet steady. "You need to trust us, it's our only chance." I nodded, heart pounding, and sprinted after the man. The others trailed behind. The hallway stretched and twisted before us, a disorienting maze. Shadows scuttled in the corners of my vision, almost alive, teasing with the promise of danger. We dashed into a room that seemed unaffected by the looming dark. The light inside was warm, offering a brief respite. An old wooden table dominated the space, its surface littered with objects, faded photographs, bone trinkets, and what looked like dried herbs. I recognized some of the faces in the photos. They were the same ones whose laughter and cries had echoed in my brief glimpse into their past. "Why are we here?" I asked, breathing heavily. "What's this place?" "This is our sanctuary," the man said, urgency in his voice. "But it won't hold for long. The darkness is restless." I could feel the shadows creeping toward us, a tangible threat that made my skin crawl. "What do you mean, restless?" I pressed, though I already feared the answer. "The darkness is a force. It feeds on despair, our despair," he explained. "You are the key to either sealing it away or unleashing it." My mind raced. "Why me? I'm just—" "A chosen one," he finished. "The book recognized you, but you must unlock its true power." Unlock its power? I felt dizzy with the weight of it all. The thought of holding that kind of responsibility terrified me. Before I could respond, the lights flickered. The shadows outside the door thickened, twisting into grotesque forms. "Stay focused," the woman shouted. "You have to find the symbol. It's the only way." "The symbol?" I echoed, my voice strained. "Yes." She stepped toward the table and pointed to a faded drawing etched into the wood. It looked like an emblem surrounded by swirling lines. "This is it. You must connect with it. It will guide you." As I leaned closer to examine the drawing, I could feel an energy pulsing from it, a subtle vibration against my fingertips. Just as I reached out, the door burst open. A mass of shadows surged forward, a collective howl echoing through the room. "Now!" the man yelled, pushing me towards the drawing. The chaos erupted behind me, and I pressed my palm against the wood, feeling warmth seep into my skin. But I wasn't prepared for the sudden rush of images that flooded my mind again. This time, however, they weren't just memories, they were visions of faces contorted in anguish. "Do it," the woman urged. "You have to harness it." The shadows lunged, and with one final push, I braced myself against the drawing, hoping it would be enough. And that's when everything went black. I gasped as the darkness engulfed me, a heavy silence pressing in all directions. It felt like I had stepped into an endless void, with no ground beneath my feet. Panic surged inside me, and I fought to steady my breathing, but it was hard to remember where I was. Then out of nowhere, light flickered back into existence. I found myself on the floor of the room, sprawled out as though I had fallen from a great height. I glanced around, disoriented, as the others hovered nearby, their expressions torn between hope and fear. "What happened?" I croaked, feeling the cool wood against my palm. Everything felt different, heavier, like I had crossed some invisible boundary. "You tapped into the power," the woman said, relief washing over her features. "But it was only the beginning." "What do you mean?" I pushed myself up, wiping the sweat from my brow. The shadows were still there, swirling in the corners of the room. But something was different, less chaotic, more watchful. "We're still in danger," the man replied, his voice urgent. "The darkness has been alerted. It knows you're here." Suddenly the walls around us shuddered, as if the house itself was in pain. A low growl emanated from the shadows, and I could feel something dark and hungry searching for me, as if it had just tasted a hint of my essence. "What do I do?" I breathed, heart racing all over again. The shadowy figures writhed as though they had been disturbed from a deep sleep. "Find the symbol," the woman repeated, her eyes glowing with a fierce intensity. "It's not just a drawing. It's a connection to the past, and it holds the key." I scanned the room for the emblem again, realizing how little time we had. Just then, I noticed something shimmering on the table. A small locket lay half hidden beneath a stack of photographs, catching the light in a way that demanded my attention. "Wait," I said, plucking the locket up. "What is this?" "That was ours," one of the spirits whispered, drifting closer. Their voice trembled, filled with longing. "It contains our memories. It's tied to the symbol, both parts of your awakening." I hesitated, looking from the locket to the drawing. Could this really help? There was a pulse of energy between them, drawing me closer. The locket felt warm in my hand, alive in a way that reassured me even while the shadows gnawed at my resolve. "Use it," the woman urged, stepping closer. "Connect the two, you can amplify the symbol's power." Summoning all my courage, I opened the locket. Inside, an image of a family grinned back at me, their joy frozen in time. A sudden flood of emotions crashed over me. Love, loss, longing. It twisted inside me, mixing with the urgency I'd felt moments before. Then I pressed the locket against the drawing. Energy flared. A blinding light shot through the room. The shadows shrieked, slashing at the illumination, desperate to snuff it out. "I can feel it!" I yelled, heart racing faster. The emotions intensified, and I let them sweep through me. As the locket and the drawing pulsed together, a sensation of power filled me, strong but chaotic. But then, I heard a voice in the wind, urgent and low, cutting through the barrier of my thoughts. "Run!" Suddenly the light flickered, and the shadows roared louder, furiously twisting and merging into a massive, looming figure. Whatever had emerged from the depths of darkness was far worse than I imagined. Without thinking, I grabbed the woman's hand, and we sprinted towards the door, pulling the others along. This sanctuary was no longer safe. My heart raced not just from fear, but from the realization that the real battle was only just beginning. We had unleashed something we couldn't control, and it was ready to claim what was rightfully its own. As we burst through the door, the air felt charged, crackling around us. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything. We stumbled into a dim hallway, barely illuminated by flickering bulbs that hung desperately from the ceiling. The house was an endless maze of shadows, and I could feel the darkness lurking just behind us. "Where to now?" I gasped, my chest tight with fear. I caught a glimpse of the shadows pooling and retracting, almost like they were testing the space behind me. The man at my side glanced around, searching for an exit. "We need to get to the attic," he said, urgency in his voice. "That's where it all leads." "Wait," I said, throwing another glance behind me. "We can't just run blindly. What if we're leading it to other people? We can't risk—" "No time," he interrupted, eyes wide. "It's coming." We crammed ourselves down the narrow corridor, pushing past old furniture that loomed like unwelcoming sentinels. I could almost hear the whimpering of the house beneath my feet, as if it knew what was to come. The darkness was relentless, closing in, breathing down my neck. We reached a staircase that twisted upwards into the gloom. Step after step, I forced myself to keep up, even as a stab of doubt nagged at me. What was in the attic? Would we find answers there, or even more questions? "Why the attic?" I shouted over my shoulder, desperate for some clarity. "The symbol!" the woman yelled. "The connection! It's in the history of this place, buried under everything else." I stumbled, nearly tripping as I processed her words. The shadow behind us pulsed with a vile hunger, and I suddenly realized I didn't want to know what it would do if it caught us. We finally reached the attic door. It was old, a heavy slab of wood adorned with rusted hinges that groaned as I pushed it open. Inside, the air felt heavy, thick with dust and neglect. But as my eyes adjusted, I caught sight of something gleaming at the far end, a large, ornate box resting atop a dusty table. "That's it," the woman cried, pointing. "The symbol should be inside." But before I could move, I felt an icy breath, a dark mist creeping over my skin. I turned in time to see a mass of shadows coalescing into that monstrous figure, its eyes like dark voids boring into me. "Get the box!" the man shouted, shoving me toward it as the others gathered around, hands clasped and trembling. "Go!" I fumbled my way to the table, my fingers trembling as I opened the box. Inside lay a beautiful tapestry, woven with intricate designs that danced under its own light. Caught in the threads was an emblem, the very same symbol that had sparked my awakening. "Bring it together!" the woman cried, her voice rising above the chaos. In the split second I grabbed the tapestry, the figure lunged. Shadows swept across the room, frantically clawing at the light. I barely had a chance to breathe, just a cry of hope slipping past my lips. "Can we stop it?" Then everything fell silent. The air chilled as I desperately pressed the tapestry against the locket, hoping for a miracle. In that heartbeat, a blinding light erupted, forcing back the shadows. I felt the heat of the energy surge through me. But as I stood there, surrounded by the brightness, the face of the darkness twisted momentarily, not in fury but in something unrecognizable. And in that frozen moment, I understood it wasn't just anger that loomed. It was something more sinister, something with a mind of its own. That's when I heard it. A low, dark laugh echoing from the depths of the shadows, and I realized that whatever we had unleashed, it wasn't finished with us yet. The light enveloped me, wrapping around like a cocoon. I felt momentarily safe, but a tingling unease buzzed in my chest. I could see the figure shifting, caught between rage and puzzlement. It snarled, pulling itself away from the brightness, retreating but not vanquished. "Keep it up, don't let go!" the woman shouted, her eyes wide, pulsing with fear and determination. But I could feel my strength waning. My grip on the tapestry slackened, and the brilliant light began to flicker as if it were an old bulb buzzing overhead. The laughter echoed again, deeper this time, vibrating through my body. It felt alive, invasive. Then all at once the dark mass surged forth, stretching its shadows toward us. I recoiled, my breath hitching as the weight of the darkness pressed down, filling the attic. I glanced at my companions. Their faces were grim, shadows deepening under their eyes. Would this be the end for us? I cast a desperate look back at the tapestry. It flickered with light, but I couldn't tell if it would hold. "What if it isn't enough?" I screamed, the panic rising in my throat. "Just trust it," the man urged, stepping closer to me. "It's our only chance." With a shaky breath, I tightened my grip again, willing the tapestry to glow brighter. The threads shimmered, absorbing the dread that lingered around us. But outside my own fear, a realization hit me. That laugh, that sinister undertone. It was mocking us. Suddenly, a loud crash sounded from below, shaking the entire house. The force felt like it stomped right through my core, rattling my bones. The attic door burst open, slamming against the wall. I wheeled around, heart pounding harder than before. "Someone's here," I gasped. "Now," the woman shouted. "We can't let anyone in, it'll follow them." The shadows writhed in anticipation, bloodthirsty. The laughter rose again, as if the presence was inviting whoever it was inside. I could barely hear the footsteps growing louder, intermingled with the echoing clangs of metal hitting the floor. My mind raced. "Who's coming? We can't let them touch the tapestry," I yelled. But deep down I knew I wouldn't be able to hold on forever. That's when I saw it, a flash of movement darting from the edge of the stairwell. But before I could scream a warning, a figure emerged, someone familiar, yet foreign. My heart sank. There, illuminated in the dim light, was my sister, her expression twisted in confusion and fear. "Help me," she cried, clutching the banister, unaware of the desperate energy swirling around her. "Get back," I yelled, this time with true terror. "Run! Don't come here!" The laughter crescendoed, gripping my heart like a vice. The shadows rallied, towering menacingly. The balance between safety and doom teetered, and in that moment I realized our fight was far from over. New dangers were descending upon us, and with my sister now involved, the stakes had never been higher. I felt the ground shift beneath me, as a new urgency surged through the room. My sister's eyes widened, filled with confusion and fear, but all I could think about was the encroaching darkness. I took a step toward her, ready to pull her to safety, but the tension in the room thickened as the dark figure that had been mocking us began to swirl closer. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice hoarse. I could feel the tapestry's warmth fading as I fought to maintain its glow. It pulsed uncertainly, reflecting my turmoil. The laughter echoed again, an unsettling sound that vibrated through my bones as my sister stood frozen, only feet away from the shadows threatening to envelop her. "Please, just trust me," I yelled, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her sense of urgency. She reached out and the shadows surged forward like a flood, eager and hungry. "Get inside!" I grabbed her wrist and yanked her back, but it was too close. The shadows twisted, encircling her just as I pulled her to safety, while I stumbled backward. It felt like a nightmare. I needed to protect her from the same fate I experienced. Everything froze momentarily. The shadows lay in wait, almost as if they were assessing us. But the baby-faced darkness didn't lose patience for long. Suddenly it lunged, shrieking with rage. "Hold on!" I got closer to the table, desperately trying to amplify the tapestry's light. In that frantic moment I turned to my sister. "You have to help me. We can't fight this alone." She nodded, fear transforming into determination in her gaze as she caught the energy swirling around the tapestry. Gripping her hands over mine, we both pressed against the emblem, sending a surge of warmth radiating outward. A bright light exploded in the attic, forcing the shadows to recoil. The dark figure snarled and twisted, revealing its true grotesque form. A monstrous face emerged, filled with rage and confusion. I could feel its malevolence, the abyss that stared back at us, wanting to crawl into our very souls. "Now!" the man cried as the shadows lurched again, fighting back against the illumination. I concentrated, pouring everything I had into the tapestry. The locket began to vibrate, resonating with our energy. It started weaving its threads into the tapestry, creating a bridge between realities, life and death, light and darkness. But the shadows would not relent. The echoes of the house trembled and the power we summoned surged, creating a whirlwind around us. I could feel its energy crackle against my skin, clashing with the dark force that clawed and howled. "Together," I urged as I glanced at my sister. "We can do this." She tightened her grip as the swirling energy expanded. I witnessed a tapestry of memories, our memories, playing out in vivid colors around us. There was laughter, warmth, and joy, all woven together with threads of grief and longing. For a moment it felt like I was in control of the very fabric of our history, reminding me of the safety I once felt. But the darkness screeched again, shattering my focus. The connection wavered and shadows began to seep back in, hungry to puncture our shield. "We need to hold on," I shouted over the cacophony. My heart raced as I pulled more from our shared experiences, hoping to harness that emotional strength. Remember the stories, remember us. It felt like I was diving into a whirlpool, the weight of the darkness pulling me under. But the shimmer of the tapestry glowed brighter. With every ounce of love and pain, I reached deeper, embracing every moment that had shaped us. I felt my sister surge with determination beside me. "Together!" she echoed, and suddenly the light whipped out like a lasso, ensnaring the darkness in tendrils of brilliance, holding it at bay for just a fraction longer. But the air felt electric, charged with desperation. Shadows lunged once again, fighting against our connection. I knew we couldn't hold the tapestry's light forever. Just then, I saw the last embers of the box's glow intensifying around us. "Do it!" I yelled, pulling every ounce of strength from us both, redirecting the energy toward the shadows. "This ends now!" The light pulsed, enveloping the menacing figure in a radiant embrace, illuminating the attic with a brilliance I had never seen. For a moment, it felt as though we were filling a void, stitching together broken pieces of the past and present. But as the darkness hissed more ferociously than ever, the reality around us began to ripple. I gasped, aware that the moment of power could slip through our grasp. And that's when I realized this was its true form. A malevolence that wanted to break free, to consume. It didn't care about anything but feeding off our fear and despair. In a fleeting second of clarity, I resolved to break this cycle. "We will not be trapped by your shadows," I shouted, my voice echoing against the chaos. "You will not take us." With that, I pushed forward with every ounce of love I had, focused and resolute. I wanted to banish it, to rid this place of its haunting grasp. Light erupted from the tapestry, a blinding flash that cut through the darkness one last time. I could feel the shadows twist, shrieking in agony, pulling away from the energy. I uttered a silent prayer, hoping we could reclaim our futures from its tendrils of despair. In that final surge of brilliance, I saw the figure dissolve, its form scattering into thousands of whispers, a memory fleeing the light. The laughter of spirits ripped away, their pleading faces fading along with it, an echo that split the air, dissipating into the corners of the room. I felt a rush of warmth envelop me as the shadows relinquished their hold, evaporating into the very fabric of time. The world slowed in that moment, and I turned to my sister. "We did it," I breathed, gasping for air. The attic began to return to its stillness. But as we stood there, hearts racing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something remained, lingering in the corners of our minds. Unanswered questions, broken stories. I glanced back to where the dark figure had been, now only a soft whisper of memory. "What did we really unleash?" I whispered, looking at the tapestry, the emblem glowing faintly. Its vibrance faded slowly, but I knew the connection could never be truly severed. Whatever we had done would remain entwined with our family, tied together in ways we might never fully understand. As we stumbled out of the attic, the familiar warmth of the house lingered, yet it felt changed, freed perhaps, but still questioning what lay beneath the surface. I still think about that night sometimes, the mysteries untold lingering like shadows, and though I moved away, I can't help but wonder about the stories still waiting to be unraveled.